I recently bought a welder. I didn't really need a welder, but it's one of those tools that you just feel like you should have in the shop. There's definitely been situations where I've started work on something and it would have just been super simple to weld it together, but instead I had to drill out and tap a bunch of holes for bolts and screws. So it just seemed like one of those tools that any good machine shop should probably have laying around, and quite frankly, it looked fun. So I picked up a welder from Harbor Freight. It was relatively cheap as far as welders go, and I'm sure it's not super high quality. It probably won't last a million years, but for a beginner, enthusiast, hobbyist in his garage, it's probably fine. This particular welder is a multi-process, so it does MIG, DC stick, and DC TIG. I've just started with MIG because it seemed like the easiest thing to go in with, but I would really like to learn TIG at some point. It looks like a pretty fun process. Of course, whenever you get a new toy, the first thing you have to do is a project to use this new toy. And so, as is pretty common with people that buy welders, the first project is a welding table because, well, welding on the ground kind of sucks, as I discovered. So, this is my little baby welding table. I don't have a whole lot of space for a table, so I made it relatively compact. It's basically built out of 1.5 inch angle iron, and I got a big plate of A36, just mild steel to go on top. I'll show you that a little bit later. So yeah, just for the next couple minutes, you'll be seeing me welding together all the different components, learning how to keep things square while you're welding, which was a reasonably difficult thing to do, as I discovered. And just kind of learning the ins and out of MIG welding, the different kind of inside outside joints, fillet welds, butt welds, kind of all the stuff that you run into when assembling a project like this. My welds aren't beautiful by any means, but they did get quite a bit better towards the end of the project, and I had some welds that I was, if not proud of, not completely discouraged by, which I figure is a pretty good start for a first project. I did start the project with a simple, cheap, Shade 10 welding helmet, and quickly just learned to hate it. I know it's one of those things that you just learn to deal with, and it makes you a better welder, yada, yada, yada. But I decided to just go ahead and go out, get myself a nice auto darkening helmet, and wow, it makes a really big difference. I'm sure I'll never be a top tier welder because I didn't suffer through, walking uphill both ways in the snow. But as a hobbyist, it just was so much better. The legs here are a little shorter because I'm going to put some rolling casters on one end to make it a little easier to move the table around. And then also the design, I wanted to leave that end open so that I could sit down and put my legs in between the table, just in case I ever want to do TIG welding while sitting. And so because of that, the design meant it was a little flimsy on that side between the casters and the not having the bottom support. So I welded in these two corner brackets to help support it. The other legs have little pieces of cut off angle as a platform, and then I'll drill a hole through it so that I can stick essentially a leveling bolt and nut to level the table and provide kind of a flat surface when it's not up on its casters. For the casters themselves, I couldn't find anything that I needed that was the right geometry and the right weight. So I went ahead and bought these casters, used a cutoff wheel to cut off kind of the flange part that you'd normally bolt to, and then welded a bolt on top of it. It's not the prettiest setup, but it works, and that's all that really matters.
Laughs came so easily tonight. You're aware I'm prepared to keep you tight. 'Cause everything you did tonight, I swear in every sense you did it right.
I didn't want to weld the tabletop surface to the table itself. I want to keep it separate so that I could level it and remove it if I wanted to. So I cut the heads off some bolts, drilled some holes through the steel plate, and then welded them in place as little studs. That way they could fit inside holes on the table itself and then be independently leveled. The steel plate is really nice. I'm happy that I found it for a pretty good price. It's 5/8 inch, and I want to say it's 23 by 19 inches. But the problem is I wanted a slightly larger table than just that, and I honestly didn't want to splash out for a bigger piece of steel for the top. And you read about different setups of welding tables and how it's nice to have clamping surfaces or drilling holes through your plate so you can have more clamping. So what I went ahead and did was kind of a mixed approach where the left side of the table is the steel plate, and then the right side of the table is basically a bunch of angle that's slotted across it to give you space to clamp to if you want to.
I'd like to keep this peace of mind. Don't wanna lose myself now. In forbidden love, my heart went so easily tonight. Just get it right. Oh, give me some now.
In my original drawings, I had the plate side set lower so that it would be flush with the angle iron and I wouldn't have to do any kind of tricky setups. I kind of forgot to do that when I was assembling the table. So it ended up being that the plate was too high and the angle on the right side was too low. So that's why you see this kind of funky setup where I have another piece of angle going horizontally to essentially act as a riser and bring the longitudinal pieces up to the right height. It's not ideal because it kind of impacts how and where you can clamp things on the two edges, but it seemed easier than cutting apart the table and fixing my earlier mistake. And I'm lazy, so that won out.
Now give me some more. Give me some now. Give me some more. Give me some now. Give me some more. Give me some now. Give me some more.
After assembly, all that was left to do was kind of polish everything up, get it painted. So first I ground off the nubbins from the bolts that were holding the table up, and then just ground off all the different bits and pieces, different welds, because I wanted the top of the table surface to be pretty flat. I was optimistic in trying to remove the mill scale, so I started with a random orbital sander thinking that surely would be fine. I learned very quickly that mill scale is pretty tough stuff. So I upgraded next to just a wire brush, thinking surely that would work. And yeah, of course that didn't either. So I just broke out the grinder and spent 30, 40 minutes painstakingly grinding the whole top surface. I'm glad I did it. It does look really nice now that it's done, but that was a lot more work than I was expecting.
Love felt so real to me tonight. I'm aware.
And here's the final product. So I gave it a coat of blue enamel and polished and oiled the top surface. I think it looks pretty good, to be honest. There's definitely problems, right? There's a bunch of welds that aren't great. It's not quite square. It's not quite level, which isn't a huge deal because my concrete floor isn't quite level either. But I'm pretty happy with it.
I like to hang with you. Don't wanna get into forbidden love. Laughs came so easily tonight. Just get it right. Oh, give me some now. Give me some more. Give me some now. Give me some more. Give me some now, give me some more. Give me some now, give me some more.
I think that's all for today. Thanks for watching.